Vladimir Putin has blamed Liz Truss for provoking his threat to use nuclear weapons. A spokesperson for the Kremlin told a press briefing. Statements were made by various representatives at various levels on possible altercations or even collisions and clashes between NATO and Russia. We believe that such statements are absolutely unacceptable. He says, I would not call the authors of these statements by name, although it was the British Foreign Minister, got a very unique way of releasing statements. It's not entirely clear which of Truss's comments the Kremlin spokesperson was referring to. One potential source could be this from Sky News.
But we're not just fighting for the people of Ukraine and the sovereignty and self-determination of Ukraine. This long-running conflict is about freedom and democracy in Europe. Because if we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, we are going to see others under threat. The Baltics, Poland, Moldova, and it could end up in a conflict with NATO.
Many news outlets are also associating the Kremlin's comments with this statement Truss made to the BBC on Sunday.
President Zelensky has asked for people from abroad to join an international force. Would you support that?
I do support that. And of course, that is something that people can make their own decisions about. But they are fighting. The people of Ukraine are fighting for freedom and democracy, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole of Europe, because that is what President Putin is challenging. And absolutely, if people want to support that struggle, I would support them in doing that.
So you support Britain, people from Britain going over to Ukraine to help in the fight?
Absolutely, if that's what they want to do.
Those latter comments followed a call from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky for the formation of an international brigade of volunteers to fight the Russian invasion. A statement published on the President's office website read, "This is the beginning of a war against Europe, against European structures, against democracy, against basic human rights, against a global order of law, rules and peaceful coexistence. Anyone who wants to join the defense of Ukraine, Europe and the world can come and fight side by side with the Ukrainians against the Russian war criminals."
You have to take these comments with a big pinch of salt. I think the reason for Vladimir Putin's nuclear escalation, the talk of ratcheting up those tensions, it's intended as a big keep out sign to the West. He's realized that this conflict is going to be a lot more protracted and difficult than the simple special operation that he had intended. The resistance from Ukraine is a lot fiercer than anticipated. And there's also a lot more coordination between the EU, NATO powers, financial institutions, cultural institutions, and the US as well, than he had expected. So the ratcheting up of the nuclear threat is a way of saying, look, stay the fuck out of this one. And I do think that there is an attempt here to drive a bit of a wedge between Liz Truss and the approach taken by, for instance, France and Germany. Liz Truss has always been a bit of an outlier. Now, in one case, in terms of Liz Truss consistently saying, look, there is going to be an invasion of Ukraine, her being an outlier and very different from the sort of attack which is being taken by Scholz and Macron meant that she ended up being correct. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Liz Truss. I do think that she's a political lightweight and she's a bit of a joke. But in this instance, she was definitely correct. She had read the climate better than her counterparts in France or in Germany. This talk, however, of British people being able to volunteer to fight alongside Ukraine against Russia is a really big departure from British government policy. You only have to look at how those who volunteered to fight ISIS were treated to see just how much of a departure that it is. You had the arrest of a man who sent £150 to his son, who had volunteered to go and fight alongside the Kurds. He was arrested on terror offences. You also had the conviction of another man on terror offences who had gone to fight alongside the Kurds. You had the systematic harassment of people who had signed up to fight ISIS. Now, ISIS obviously weren't a global power. It was a similarly moral distinction in terms of these guys are definitely bad and they're doing a bad thing. It wasn't a political climate of sympathy with ISIS or looking for a diplomatic solution. But the reason why the people who'd volunteered to go and fight against them were criminalized in the way that they were was because it was simply at odds with UK government policy, and also because they were signing up to fight alongside the Kurds, that put them at odds with a fellow NATO member and ally, Turkey. So it is a very big departure from what's come before. And I don't think it's surprising that the Russian government have tried to portray this as NATO escalation, as a reason to justify a more belligerent stance on their part. But it is quite a big departure from what came before.
I want to show a clip of one of Liz Truss's colleagues. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has taken a slightly less gung-ho approach when it comes to encouraging people to go to fight in Ukraine.
Would you want untrained blokes and women alongside you?
Untrained blokes. Well, first of all, let's remember, untrained people in Ukraine are fighting the Russian army, and some of them successful. There are men and women joining up in bravery and making a difference. Some of the heroic battles have been partly because the Russians cannot understand, funnily enough, that people don't like their country invaded. So they have a role. But no, my advice to Britons listening to this is, look, there are lots of ways to help the Ukrainian fight. First and foremost, you can donate to the Ukrainian embassy, and they use that money to purchase lethal and non-lethal aid to help, and other areas, whether it's medicines or humanitarian. That's the first way you can help. The second way, if you want to help in voluntary organizations dealing with refugees or anything else, they're all out there. If you are really determined to go, you will be breaking Foreign Office travel advice. But if you are determined to go, my advice is be trained, be someone who has an experience in the armed forces. Don't be a serving member of the armed forces because you'll be deserting. Yes. But be a trained person because it is very dangerous, and I don't want to see British people killed any more than I want to see Ukrainians.
It does seem as if there are trained people answering the call. Ukraine's ambassador to the UK has said that he's been overwhelmed by offers to help.
President Zelensky says he is establishing an international legion. Would you ask foreign citizens to go to Ukraine and fight?
It was already done because we have overwhelming number of people coming and just bombarding us, staying in front of embassy and requiring, demanding to allow them. We don't want to break any laws, especially international laws. But most of these people who are coming, they're Ukrainians. They have a right to come home at any moment and fight.
And you have a lot of people who are turning up.
You wouldn't believe it's not just Ukrainians. Everybody from all the nations just asking how we can get in.
The Daily Mail has reported that British volunteers are already on their way to Ukraine. A commander of the Georgian National Legion has recruited a team to fight alongside the Ukrainians. He told the Mail, "I have a very big group of Britons, around 60, travelling to Ukraine to join up with my Georgian National League unit. They are travelling by car from the UK and will cross over at the Polish border. I am expecting them here with equipment and supplies in the next few days. They are mostly guys who have fought with me in Ukraine before, but there are also new recruits as well." He says, "We will provide them with training and weapons, and they are coming from London and all over Britain. Their background is former British Army and Special Forces, and they are good fighters. They can be trusted to take on the Russian aggressors and, most importantly, win. What I want to stress is that none of them are getting paid. They are not mercenaries. They are all volunteers." He added that he expected the number of volunteers to grow to 500 in the next few days, so a significant number. And for those who want to help without taking up arms, the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine has suggested another avenue. He said, "We are creating an IT army. We need digital talents. All operational tasks will be given here. There will be tasks for everyone. We continue to fight on the cyber front. The first task is on the channel for cyber specialists."
There's always an element of a double-edged sword here, because on the one hand, there are so many examples that we can name of international volunteers going to fight for democracy against an authoritarian force in ways which were undoubtedly a force for good. You can think about the international brigades during the Spanish Civil War. You can think about the volunteers much more recently who went to go fight ISIS alongside the Kurds. Sorry, you're getting a little Musa cameo here. But there are also examples where there has been an element of backlash from that. One very recent example of that is, of course, Salman Abedi, who was the Manchester Arena bomber. He was somebody who was from the UK and then went with his father to Libya to fight as part of a jihadist group against Muammar Gaddafi. So he came back with more combat training than he had left with, and that made him much more dangerous. And he ended up doing something absolutely dreadful on British soil that involved the civilian loss of life. So you have to, I think, be able to make judgments on the basis of who's going and for what reason. I think for the overwhelming majority of Ukrainians, this is a very straightforward moral choice, which is, do you go and fight alongside your family, your friends, your community against a very naked war of Russian aggression? It's a very straightforward moral choice. But then there are much smaller elements, a minority of people, but this is still something which is important to think about, who perhaps are part of the nationalist far right, probably not even Ukrainian, who find the idea of violence in itself attractive. Now, if even there are a handful of members of the British far right volunteering because they see something like the Azov battalion and they see that as an attractive and option which is in ideological alignment with themselves, well, that is something which then becomes quite worrying, even just from a very selfish British perspective. So I think that there are really difficult choices being presented to Ukrainian people with dual nationality. I think that there is also very good moral reasons to want to go and fight against a war of aggression, an invasion which is being motivated primarily by expansionism and chauvinism. But I think that part of the job of journalists is to also point out this unintended effect of blowback sometimes. And for governments, their responsibility is to think about how you best mitigate against that.